I'm Grace Thompson, 32 years old, always the overlooked shadow in my family, standing next to my sister Camille. At my parents' 40th anniversary party in Seattle, Camille, 42, the queen of event planning, ripped into me with her usual smirk, calling my military work just paperwork while the guests chuckled. I'm a major in Special Operations Command, 6 years in covert missions, but to them I was nothing compared to Camille's million-dollar deals. I swallowed my anger, gripping my wine glass until the doorbell rang. Camille's son Liam, a military pilot, walked in wearing a crisp uniform and snapped a salute. "Major Thompson," he said, his voice cutting across the room. Camille's jaw dropped and every head turned to look at me. If you've ever been dismissed by your own family, you'll understand why that moment changed everything. Comment if your family has ever underestimated you, and subscribe to see how I finally turned the tables. I stood frozen, the stem of my wine glass biting into my palm as Liam held his salute a moment longer, steady and unwavering. No one moved, no one spoke. For 6 years, I had returned from deployments to this same living room, Camille's designer furniture, the polished floors, the curated perfection, and listened to them dismiss my work as a hobby I would grow out of. I had never seen my sister speechless. Liam lowered his hand and stepped closer. "I apologize for the interruption, ma'am," he said, formally glancing around the silent room. "But Colonel Ramsey sent me to deliver this in person." He held out a sealed folder with my name on the front. I took it with both hands, feeling the weight of it, not just the paper, but what it represented, proof that my life had never been just paperwork. All those years, Camille had laughed, called me directionless while I carried responsibilities she couldn't begin to imagine. Around us, the guests stared like they were seeing me for the first time. My father's mouth worked soundlessly, Linda's eyes wide, her manicured fingers clutching the edge of the table. I met Liam's gaze and nodded once, my voice calm when I finally spoke. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll take it from here." As I tucked the folder under my arm, I felt the tension crackling across the dining room, thick enough to choke on. For a few stunned seconds, nobody moved. Camille's perfectly lipsticked mouth hung open, her eyes flicking between me and Liam, searching for something, an explanation, a way to pretend this wasn't happening. My father cleared his throat, the sound brittle. "Grace," he said, voice rough, "is this important?" I looked at him evenly. "Yes, Dad, it's classified. But I can tell you this much, it's not just typing reports." A hush fell again, broken only by the soft clink of someone setting down a glass. Liam straightened his uniform, impossibly crisp, and shifted his gaze to Camille. For a split second, he almost looked sorry for her. Almost. Then he turned to me and spoke clearly so no one could pretend they hadn't heard. "Ma'am, your analysis saved my crew's lives last month. Colonel Ramsey sends his personal thanks." A tremor passed through my sister's expression like her mask had slipped. I felt something inside me, something that had been knotted tight for years, begin to uncoil, slow and undeniable. "I appreciate it, Lieutenant," I said, steady as I'd ever been. Camille's hand drifted to her necklace, fingers worrying the delicate gold chain like it was the only thing holding her together. The rest of the family sat in stunned silence. My aunt shifted in her chair, avoiding my eyes. A cousin pretended to check her phone. No one knew what to say when the invisible sister turned out to be someone whose work could change the outcome of a mission. My father finally pushed back his chair, standing slower than I'd ever seen him. He looked at me as though trying to reconcile the daughter he'd always underestimated with the woman in front of him. "Grace," he began, but the words trailed off too heavy to finish. I didn't wait for him to find them. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed calm. "I'll step outside to finish this conversation," I said to Liam, and he nodded once, crisp and precise. I glanced at Camille one last time. She looked almost small, her perfect posture collapsing as if the truth weighed more than any of her accomplishments. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the dining room, every step feeling lighter than the one before. Behind me, the silence finally broke in a flurry of hushed, frantic whispers. The hallway felt cooler, the air easier to breathe away from all their judgment. Liam followed me, his boots silent on the polished hardwood. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He stood there in uniform, so young but already carrying more respect than I'd ever been given in that house. I turned to face him fully, my hand still pressed over the sealed folder. "Did Colonel Ramsey really send you?" I asked, my voice low. Liam's mouth twitched almost a smile. "Partly," he admitted. He did want you briefed, but I also called him. I blinked, surprised. You called him? I called because I was tired of hearing them talk about you like you were nothing, he said, his tone steady but fierce. You deserve better than that. The words hit something raw in me, a place I thought I'd already walled off. For a moment, I couldn't answer. Liam shifted, clearing his throat. Permission to speak freely, ma'am? I nodded, my throat tight. You're the bravest person I know, he said simply. They needed to see it. I swallowed hard, feeling heat prickle behind my eyes. No one in my family had ever spoken to me like that, with respect that wasn't begrudging or laced in condescension. For years, I'd told myself I didn't care what they thought. But standing here, hearing Liam say it out loud, I realized a part of me had always been waiting for someone to notice. I looked down at the folder in my hands, the seal unbroken, and felt the weight of every mission, every sleepless night, every sacrifice that no one at that dinner table would ever understand. When I finally looked up, Liam was watching me closely, like he was waiting for me to believe him. Thank you, I said quietly, my voice rougher than I wanted it to be. He inclined his head, that pilot's composure never faltering. You don't have to thank me, he said. You earned it. And for the first time in years, I almost believed that was true. A hush had settled behind the closed dining room doors, the kind that followed after a storm. I could picture them all sitting there, trying to rewrite the narrative they'd clung to for so long, that I was the weak one, the unremarkable one. I drew a slow breath, steadying my hands. Liam shifted his weight, studying me with clear, steady eyes that reminded me so much of the best people I'd served alongside, people who understood sacrifice without needing to boast about it. If you'd rather I hadn't done this, he began, but I shook my head before he could finish. No, I said firmly, you did exactly what needed to be done. A silence passed between us, not awkward, but heavy with everything that had just shifted. They'll probably never see you the same way again, Liam said finally. I exhaled, feeling something close to relief. Good, I murmured. I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am. Liam's mouth curved into a small, satisfied smile, the kind that didn't need any words to explain. For a moment, I just stood there, taking in the quiet, the way the air felt clearer now that the truth was out in the open. The years I'd spent trying to earn their approval seemed almost absurd in that instant. I was a major. I had led teams, made decisions under fire, carried responsibilities most people couldn't imagine, and none of it had ever been for them. I glanced down at the folder again, feeling a calm certainty settle in my chest. Will you tell Colonel Ramsey I'll be ready for the briefing tomorrow? I asked, my voice steady. Liam nodded. I will. And I'm proud to serve under you. The sincerity in his voice left me momentarily unable to speak. Get home safe, Lieutenant, I managed finally. He gave one last crisp salute before he turned and disappeared out the front door. I watched the door close behind Liam, the echo of his boots fading into the quiet hall. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there with my hand on the folder, letting the adrenaline drain from my body. When I finally turned back toward the dining room, I could hear the low murmur of voices, hushed, uncertain, nothing like the confident chatter from earlier. I straightened my shoulders, feeling taller somehow. As I stepped back into the doorway, every head turned. Camille's eyes were wide, her perfectly applied makeup doing nothing to hide the flush on her face. My father shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat as if he might say something to fill the heavy silence. Linda looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. For once, no one interrupted me when I spoke. I have to leave early, I said evenly, my voice carrying across the table. Duty calls. No one tried to stop me. I set my wine glass down on the sideboard with deliberate care, the faint clink sounding louder than any of their polite conversations ever had. Camille opened her mouth, then closed it again, her expression stuck between disbelief and something that almost looked like regret. My father finally spoke, his voice rough. Grace, we didn't realize I met his gaze without flinching. No, I said quietly. You didn't. For a moment, the truth of it seemed to settle over the table like a weight none of them knew how to lift. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired and strangely free. Without waiting for anyone to say another word, I turned and walked toward the front door. As I stepped outside into the cold Seattle night, I felt the knot in my chest begin to loosen at last. The night air hit my face like a baptism, crisp and clean after the suffocating tension inside. I drew in a deep breath, tasting rain on the wind, feeling more present than I had in years. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a second I considered ignoring it. But old habits died hard. I pulled it out and saw a message from Sophie, my closest friend in the unit. "You okay? Heard you were going to that circus tonight." A small, exhausted laugh slipped out of me. I typed back with steady hands. "Better than okay." They finally saw who I am. Sophie's reply came almost instantly. "About damn time! Proud of you!" I stared at her words, feeling something warm settle deep in my chest, something like peace, something like belonging. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, the glow of Sophie's message lingering in my mind. For so long, I'd believed the only way to prove my worth was to keep showing up at those dinners, to keep absorbing their dismissal like it was my duty. But tonight had rewritten all of that. I walked to my car parked between Camille's luxury SUV and my father's polished sedan, my plain rental looking almost defiant in comparison. Unlocking the door, I set the sealed folder on the passenger seat and took one last look at the house glowing behind me. A part of me wondered if they were still sitting there, replaying every word, every salute. Another part didn't care anymore. I climbed inside, started the engine, and felt a calm certainty settle in my bones. For the first time in my life, I was leaving on my own terms. The drive back to base was quiet, the highway nearly empty as midnight crept closer. Rain streaked across the windshield, blurring the lights of Seattle into soft halos that looked almost peaceful. I kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting on the folder beside me, as if to remind myself it was real, that everything I'd built mattered whether or not my family ever understood. My thoughts drifted to Liam, to the steady way he'd stood at my side when no one else had. I wondered if Camille could feel the difference now that her own son had chosen to honor me in front of them all. A small part of me hoped she did, but the rest of me had finally stopped needing her validation. The wipers clicked in a slow, even rhythm, and I exhaled a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. This was my life, difficult, demanding, and completely mine. When I reached the security gate, the guard recognized me immediately and gave a respectful nod. "Evening, Major Thompson," he said, his voice warm despite the late hour. "Evening," I replied, and it struck me how different it felt to be greeted here without judgment, without pretense. Just respect earned and honest. He waved me through and I eased the car into the lot behind the main intelligence building, the familiar rows of unadorned concrete walls, welcoming in a way my childhood home never had. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drumming steadily on the roof. My uniform jacket hung in the back seat, still damp at the shoulders from Liam's salute. I reached for it, smoothing the fabric between my fingers, feeling the quiet pride settle deeper in my chest. No matter what they chose to believe, this was where I belonged, and no one could take that from me again. I gathered the folder and my jacket, stepping out into the rain without bothering to shield myself. The water soaked my hair, clung to my face, but I welcomed it like it was washing away years of resentment I didn't need to carry anymore. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights hummed softly, the corridors empty except for the overnight duty officer. He looked up from his desk and nodded with quiet recognition. "Long night, Major," I managed a wry smile. "You could say that." He didn't ask for details. No one here would gossip or speculate about my family. They respected the boundaries I'd fought to protect. I signed in the motion automatic after so many years and felt my shoulders ease as I walked toward my office. Behind these doors, I wasn't the invisible sister or the disappointment. I was simply Major Grace Thompson, and that was enough. My office was exactly as I'd left it, orderly, functional, the single framed photo on my desk showing me and Sophie both in fatigues, grinning with mud on our faces after a grueling training exercise. I set the sealed folder down beside the picture and shrugged out of my damp jacket, draping it carefully over the back of my chair. For a moment, I just stood there, hands braced on the edge of the desk, feeling the quiet settle around me like a blanket. No chatter about million-dollar deals, no sideways glances questioning my worth, just the steady hum of equipment and the knowledge that my work mattered. I drew in a long, steadying breath. Whatever tomorrow's briefing held, I was ready. I reached for a fresh notepad, flipped it open, and began sketching out the preliminary analysis. Outside, the rain kept falling, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like something I needed to outrun. My pen moved steadily across the page, the familiar rhythm of note-taking grounding me more than any hollow apology ever could. Each line I wrote reminded me of what I'd accomplished, the hundreds of lives impacted by reports no one in my family would ever be cleared to read. That used to frustrate me to know I could never fully explain why I chose this path, why I stayed. But tonight had proven that some truths didn't need their understanding to be real. My phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a new message from Sophie. Still awake? I'm making sure you didn't set their table on fire. A surprised laugh escaped me, the sound echoing softly off the concrete walls. No fires, I typed back. But I did leave before dessert. A second later, her reply flashed across the screen. Proud of you. About damn time you walked out. I leaned back in my chair, phone resting in my palm as Sophie's words sank in. About damn time you walked out. She was right. I'd spent too many years sitting quietly at tables where I was never really invited to belong. Tonight I hadn't needed anyone's permission to leave. I'd claimed my place and then chosen to step away on my own terms. The thought settled over me with a calm finality. I typed a reply, my thumb steady. Feels good actually, like I can finally breathe. Another message appeared almost instantly. That's what happens when you stop letting other people define you. I smiled, the last of the tension easing from my shoulders. In this space, these four unremarkable walls, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just me, and that was more than enough. I set the phone aside and turned my attention back to the notepad, the lines of analysis slowly taking shape in my handwriting. Each word I jotted down felt like a quiet declaration: I have earned this. A stack of classified reports waited in the secure cabinet behind my desk, evidence of years no one at that dinner table could ever fully comprehend. I didn't need them to. I thought again of Liam, the calm respect in his eyes as he'd saluted me in front of everyone who doubted I'd ever amount to anything. It wasn't lost on me that it had taken the next generation to finally say out loud what I'd always hoped someone would see. My gaze drifted to the photo of Sophie and me, and I felt a warm surge of gratitude for the people who had never needed convincing. People who respected my choices, my service without needing them, translated into their narrow definition of success. I clicked my pen closed and leaned back, feeling lighter than I had in years. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but I wasn't tired. Instead, I felt charged with a quiet energy, the kind that came from finally telling the truth even if no one at that table was ready to hear it. I rose and walked to the window, looking out at the darkened base. Security lights glowed along the perimeter fence, casting long beams across the wet pavement. Somewhere beyond those lights, Liam was driving home. I wondered if Camille would try to call me to smooth over the cracks in her carefully constructed image. For once, I didn't feel any urgency to respond. I pressed my palm lightly to the glass, feeling the cool surface ground me. This place, this life wasn't glamorous or easy to explain, but it was real. It was mine. And that was something no dismissive comment or forced smile could ever take away again. I turned back to my desk, the hum of the fluorescent lights steady above me. My gaze landed again on the folder Liam had delivered, thick with the next mission brief, the details that would fill the coming weeks with purpose and focus. I reached for it, running my thumb over the embossed seal before I broke it open. Inside, dense pages of intelligence reports waited coded references to places and names most people would never hear about. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. This was the work that mattered, not the applause of people who measured worth in parties and glossy magazines, not the shallow approval that could vanish the second I refused to play the part they'd assigned me. I flipped to the first page and began to read, the familiar rhythm of analysis washing over me like a steady tide. In this room with these responsibilities, I knew exactly who I was. Line by line, I marked up the report, my pen moving in practice sweeps across the margins. The data was complex, encrypted communications, satellite images, logistical patterns, but complexity never intimidated me. If anything, it steadied me. Each problem was something I could untangle, unlike the years of silent disappointment I'd worn like a second skin. A faint memory flickered Camille, rolling her eyes when I told her I specialized in intelligence work. Her voice dripping with condescension. Sounds boring, she'd said, waving her hand like I was a child describing a pretend job. My pen paused over the page. But this time, the memory didn't sting the way it used to. I set the pen down and exhaled slowly. She could never have survived even a single week of this life, and I didn't need her approval to keep going. I gathered the marked-up pages into a neat stack and slipped them into a secure folder, sealing it shut with a practiced flick of my wrist. The movement felt almost ceremonial, like drawing a final line under everything that had happened tonight. My family could keep their stories, their assumptions, their need to fit me into a box that had never belonged to me. I had my own story now, and it was written in every mission completed. Every life saved, every line of data no one else could decipher. I straightened, rolling my shoulders back until the last of the tension slipped away. My gaze drifted to the door to the empty hallway beyond, and for the first time I realized I didn't feel alone. The respect of the people I served with mattered more than any shallow approval I'd spent years chasing. That thought settled over me like an anchor, solid, unshakable, and I knew without question I would never trade this life for theirs. I switched off the desk lamp, the room falling into a softer darkness broken only by the glow of the monitors on standby. For a moment, I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust, feeling the quiet surround me like a promise. Tomorrow would bring new orders, new pressures, another stretch of days spent solving problems most people would never know existed. But tonight I had earned a kind of peace I hadn't thought possible. As I locked the classified files away, my hand brushed the corner of the photo of Sophie and me, and I felt a rush of gratitude so strong it almost unsteadied me. Gratitude for the ones who never needed me to be anything but myself. I picked up my uniform jacket and draped it over my arm, the damp fabric cooling my skin. One last glance around the office confirmed it. This was home in a way the house I'd left behind had never been. I stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me with a quiet finality. The corridor was empty, hushed except for the low buzz of emergency lights running along the ceiling. My boots echoed on the polished floor as I walked toward the exit, each step steady and unhurried. I passed the framed commendations on the wall, certificates, photos, reminders of the missions that had defined my career. Once I'd wished my family could see them, could grasp what all those late nights and classified reports really meant. Now I realized it didn't matter if they never did. Recognition wasn't what had kept me going all these years. It was the certainty that the work itself mattered, that I mattered even when no one was watching. I reached the door that led to the parking lot and paused with my hand on the handle, letting that truth sink all the way in. When I finally stepped outside, the rain had eased to a soft drizzle, the night sky wide and open above me. I drew in a long, slow breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs. The drizzle speckled my hair and uniform, but I didn't bother to shield myself. It felt good, cleansing, in a way I couldn't quite put into words. In the quiet lot, my car waited under a halo of pale security lights. I walked toward it, the gravel crunching under my boots, every step measured and sure. As I reached for the door, my phone vibrated again, the screen lighting up with a name I hadn't expected. Camille. I stood there for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. Once the sight of her name would have sent a tight knot of dread twisting through my stomach. Now all I felt was a calm detachment, as if her opinion had finally lost the power to wound me. I let the phone keep buzzing, slipped it into my pocket, and opened the car door without looking back. I settled into the driver's seat, shutting the door behind me with a soft thud that seemed to mark the end of something. The car was quiet, the dashboard lights casting a gentle glow across my hands as I gripped the steering wheel. For a few breaths, I just sat there, letting the silence wrap around me. Camille's call finally went to voicemail, the screen going dark again. I didn't feel guilty for ignoring it. Some bridges weren't meant to be crossed in a single night, no matter how dramatic the revelation. I started the engine, the steady rumble grounding me in the present. As I pulled out of the lot, I thought of Liam's salute, of Sophie's message, of the moment I'd walked out of that dining room with my head high. And I knew that no matter what waited ahead, I would never again let myself be diminished to make someone else comfortable. The road stretched out in front of me, slick with rain and glinting under the passing streetlights. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly over the folder on the passenger seat. My next mission, my next purpose. The thought was steadying, a reminder that whatever chaos my family stirred up, my work remained unchanged. As I merged onto the highway, the city receded behind me, its skyline blurred by the mist. I felt no pull to turn back, no lingering ache to fix what had never been mine to repair. My phone chimed once more, a voicemail notification from Camille, but I ignored it, focusing on the dark ribbon of road ahead. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was driving toward the life I'd built, the one no one had given me permission to claim. And as the miles slipped by beneath my tires, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. The highway was nearly empty, only a few taillights flickering in the distance like small red stars. My wipers swept away the last of the rain, clearing the glass until all I could see was the clean, open road. I felt a quiet satisfaction settle deep in my chest, stronger than any apology could have offered. This was what freedom looked like, simple, unadorned, earned. My phone vibrated again, this time a text. Call me when you can. Camille. I read it once, then set the phone face down on the console. I would call her eventually when I was ready, not when guilt or obligation demanded it. My life no longer revolved around making her comfortable or proving my worth in her language. As I pressed the accelerator and felt the car respond, a calm certainty settled in my bones. I was done shrinking myself to fit anyone's story. A green highway sign flashed past overhead, pointing the way back toward base housing and the familiar streets I'd memorized years ago. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the asphalt dark and gleaming under the sodium lights. I loosened my grip on the wheel, breathing in a steady rhythm that felt like the opposite of all those anxious nights I'd spent replaying Camille's words in my head. Tonight, there was nothing left to replay. No more need to edit my memories into something more palatable, something that hurt less. I was simply done. My phone stayed silent, as if even Camille had finally realized she couldn't force me back into the role I'd abandoned. I passed the last exit before the base and felt no hesitation. This was where I belonged, on a road of my own making, with no one's expectations steering me off course, and for the first time in years, that was enough. I turned off onto the narrow access road that led to the secure parking lot behind my building. The gate recognized my credentials instantly, swinging open without delay. As I drove through, I felt the last threads of the evening's tension finally give way to something like relief. The base was quiet, most of the offices dark except for a few windows glowing with the soft light of other late-night analysts. I pulled into my usual spot, shutting off the engine, and let the quiet wrap around me like a familiar blanket. This was where I had always been most myself, in the spaces where purpose outweighed pretense, where respect was earned by action, not appearances. I sat for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, feeling the contrast between this place and the polished perfection of Camille's world. No more pretending, no more performing, just the work and the life I'd chosen. I picked up the folder from the passenger seat, running my thumb over the edge of the heavy cardstock one last time before tucking it under my arm. The sky above the base had started to clear, revealing a scattering of cold stars. I locked the car and walked toward the building entrance, my boots quiet on the wet pavement. Every step felt deliberate, solid in a way I hadn't experienced in years. This place didn't care who my family was or what they thought of me. It only cared that I showed up, that I did the work, that I carried my share of the weight. And that was enough. I keyed in my access code and let the door swing open, the familiar scent of coffee and paper welcoming me home. As I stepped inside, I knew with absolute certainty I would never again ask for permission to belong. The hallway was empty, the low hum of the ventilation system the only sound. I walked past the bulletin board where mission updates were pinned in neat rows, each line of text a reminder that this work never stopped. And neither did I. My office door was ajar, just as I'd left it, a small lamp casting a soft circle of light over my desk. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me, savoring the quiet. For a moment, I stood there with the folder in my hands, feeling the simple weight of it 1,000 times more real than any praise Camille had ever chased. I set it down next to my notepad and drew in a slow breath, letting my shoulders relax. The rain had passed, the storm was over, and I was still here, exactly where I was meant to be. I eased into my chair and let my gaze drift over the tidy stacks of reports waiting for me, each one a testament to the trust my superiors had placed in my judgment. Trust I had earned line by line, mission by mission, without ever needing to broadcast it to the world. My phone rested face down on the corner of the desk. For a moment, I considered picking it up, checking to see if Camille had tried again. But I didn't. Tonight wasn't about her. I turned instead to the fresh set of intelligence briefs, flipping the first page open and skimming the lines of data, the familiar cadence already settling my thoughts. This was where I'd always belonged, in the quiet, in the work, in the life I'd built without anyone's permission. And nothing, not even my family's late and uncertain recognition, could change that now. I picked up my pen and began annotating the first report, the tip, scratching steady lines across the margin. Each notation felt like a small reclamation proof that my purpose had never needed anyone else's validation. My phone vibrated again, buzzing softly against the desk. I didn't look at it. Instead, I kept writing, focused on the task in front of me. The operations I supported would continue long after tonight's family drama faded, and that truth steadied me in a way nothing else could. I paused just long enough to sip the cold coffee in my mug, its bitterness familiar and oddly comforting. Outside my window, the sky was just beginning to lighten, a pale wash of gray replacing the darkness. Dawn was coming indifferent to everything that had happened, and I was ready to meet it exactly as I was. I set the pen down and stretched my arms overhead, feeling the satisfying pull in my shoulders after hours spent hunched over reports. The quiet was absolute now, the kind of stillness that only came at the edge of morning. My phone remained where I'd left it, screen dark, as if it had finally surrendered its insistence. I let my gaze drift over the familiar outlines of the office, my photo with Sophie, the worn chair in the corner, the locked cabinet where our years of classified files rested. This small, windowless room held more meaning for me than any of Camille's grand ballrooms ever had. I thought again of Liam's salute, of the way everyone's eyes had finally turned to me, not in pity, but in recognition. A part of me knew that moment had shifted something permanent, but the most important change had happened long before that night, when I chose this path and never looked back. I rose from my chair, gathering the annotated reports into a neat stack ready for the morning briefing. My movements were unhurried, deliberate, an unspoken declaration that I didn't owe anyone urgency but myself and my mission. As I slid the papers into a secure envelope, I felt the last of the night's uncertainty fade. I no longer needed to wonder if I'd done enough to be seen. I no longer needed to question whether my life measured up to someone else's idea of success. My worth wasn't a negotiation. I locked the file cabinet and turned off the lamp, letting the soft darkness settle across the room. The first streaks of sunrise glimmered at the far edge of the lot outside, and for the first time, I felt no pull to explain myself to anyone. I slipped into the hallway, my footsteps soft on the polished floor as I walked toward the main exit. The sky outside had shifted to a muted blue, the promise of a new day washing over the base, like a quiet benediction. I paused by the door, one hand resting on the frame, and let my thoughts settle. My phone stayed silent in my pocket, but I knew eventually Camille would try again, another call, another message, maybe even an apology she hadn't yet learned how to mean. And that was fine. I didn't need her to get it all right on the first try or any try at all. I'd stopped measuring my value by her understanding. I stepped outside, breathing in the cool morning air that smelled faintly of damp concrete and something cleaner, something like freedom. Whatever came next, I knew I could meet it on my own terms. The lot was almost empty, only a few other cars glinting in the pale light as dawn unfolded over the rooftops. I walked across the pavement, feeling the crisp air bite pleasantly at my cheeks. Each step carried a clarity I hadn't felt in years, a simple conviction that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for who I had become. As I reached my car, I paused to look back at the building, the place that had taught me how to trust my own judgment, how to stand steady when everything else tried to push me down. My phone vibrated softly. I pulled it out and saw a new text from Camille. "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I read the words without feeling the old ache they used to bring. Maybe one day I would answer. But not today. Today I had already chosen my peace. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying and opened the car door, letting the familiar scent of old upholstery and stale coffee greet me. As I settled behind the wheel, I felt the last of the night's weight lift off my shoulders. The sunrise spilled across the dashboard, catching on the edges of the sealed folder resting in the passenger seat, my next mission, my real purpose. I didn't know if Camille's apology was sincere, or if it was just her way of patching over the embarrassment of finally seeing me as I was. Either way, it didn't change the truth I carried out of that house. I was not invisible. I was not small. I was exactly who I had fought to become. I started the engine, the quiet purr, steady and familiar, and pulled out of the lot toward whatever waited next. And for the first time in my life, I knew I was already enough. If you've ever felt underestimated or invisible, I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't defined by anyone else's approval. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experience in the comments below. And if you'd like to follow more stories about finding strength and owning your truth, subscribe to the channel so we can walk this path together.